So let's talk about some emotionally painful natal chart aspects. So the first one that I'll mention is a difficult aspect between the moon and Saturn. The conjunction is also considered difficult here, and also the inconjunct, which is often an overlooked aspect, and it's called a minor aspect. It's not so minor. So when there's a hard aspect between moon and Saturn in the birth chart, where we are looking for emotional security shown by moon is constantly up against Saturn, the planet of karma, and what's really, really difficult for us. This placement, this aspect can show a more negative mindset leading to depression. But the positive side of this is that because it's so difficult for us to find happiness here, we actually end up looking pretty hard for it. And if we do some work on ourselves, we can be one of the few people in the world that actually does find it. But that doesn't mean that it's not very emotionally difficult in the process. Often with this placement, the childhood was difficult or painful, and the messages from the father or even the mother too were not supportive or helpful to having healthy self-esteem. And so we can tend to put ourselves down and, not even give ourselves a proper chance to be happy because we feel so unworthy. But like I said, the positive of this is if we do work on ourselves, because we'll want to with this aspect because of how difficult our life is, we can end up being very successful and very motivated and focused in our life and be the emotionally supportive person for others because we did not feel that in our childhood. The next natal chart placement of emotional difficulty is Saturn in any of the water signs. So Saturn in our natal chart is the planet of karma and what is really difficult for us and what we have no choice but to work on. And it ends up becoming an area of mastery because it's so difficult. So with Saturn in any of the water signs, the area of life that we are here to work through and work on that is so difficult for us is in the area of emotions. So this can show a lot of emotional difficulty and challenges and a deep sadness and a deep loneliness. Which ultimately, if we do the work that Saturn is calling us to do, we end up becoming some of the most emotionally secure people because that emotional security is not dependent on things of the world. It is actually dependent on our very own personal emotional strength and even a spiritual strength with this placement. But it doesn't mean that it's not very emotionally difficult in the process. And usually the life is very emotionally difficult as well. Like, these are the people that have had a hard life and have had some hard challenges dealt to them. The last placement that I'm going to talk about today is a heavy emphasis or stellium in the 6th or the 12th house. The 6th and the 12th house is known to be like the axis of suffering, where the 6th house is on a more physical plane. There could be health problems. There could be challenges with the day-to-day life that makes life very bleak and emotionally difficult and stressful. And the 12th house is more of an emotional suffering and like a crisis of fitting onto this planet and deep loneliness and, many spiritual gifts, but a very emotionally challenging placement. So if we have a heavy emphasis or stellium in those houses, life can be very emotionally difficult. The last house that I will mention is the 8th house. It doesn't necessarily have to mean suffering, but it does mean that we will have to go through many revolutionary changes in our life. And to most people, specifically, fixed signs or earth signs, change that is, not of our own choosing can be very emotionally difficult. So if we have a heavy emphasis of planets in the 8th house, we're going to go through many transformations, and this can be emotionally difficult, but it's also like, we constantly get to go through this rebirth and we get to constantly be a new person and, die to old identities that are no longer us. So that would be the positive side of having a heavy 8th house emphasis, although it can be very emotionally difficult.